The coronavirus pandemic that we've been living through during the past few months has been very difficult for many people and at the very least disorienting for all of us. It has impacted not just people's physical health, but also their mental health. Survey research has found heightened levels of anxiety and worry, depression, anger and aggression. Domestic violence has increased. And these increased feelings of distress are in many ways understandable. We have concerns about ourselves or our loved ones possibly becoming infected and maybe even dying from the virus. Some of us have lost loved ones to COVID-19. Many have financial concerns due to a loss of income or the falling stock market. There's a lot of distress arising from the general disruption of our lives, being stuck at home away from friends and loved ones, not being able to do the sorts of things we normally do to make ourselves happy, like going shopping in the mall, getting together with friends or family, playing with our grandchildren, going on a cruise. 4 months ago, everything was going along smoothly and normally, and then bang, our world was shaken up and thrown into a strange twilight zone. I think this pandemic can be an impetus for us to focus our attention on the things that are truly of most value to us. It forces us to get in touch with the core sources of meaning in our lives. A number of years ago, I started getting interested in Stoicism as a philosophy of life. And over time, I've begun to see myself as a Stoic. And I've been trying to put this philosophy into practice in my life. Now, I can't say that I'm really good at it yet, but I'm working on it. In these past few months of the pandemic, I've been finding it particularly helpful. But I don't want you to think that I'm trying to convert everyone to Stoicism today. My main point here is that it's important for each of us to find a philosophy of life that provides us with an overarching sense of meaning and a way of coping with adversity. For many, that philosophy will take the form of a religious faith, whether some form of Christianity or Buddhism or Taoism or another faith. For others, it might be a different philosophy, perhaps existentialism or Aristotelianism. So different people will be attracted to different paradigms depending on their cultural background, their life experiences, their personality traits, and so on. So I'd just like to share with you how Stoicism is one way of finding strength in times like this, which I have found to be beneficial. So where does Stoicism come from? Stoicism originated in Greece around 300 BC and became a very well-known and popular philosophy throughout the Roman Empire for about 500 years, until around the time of the rise of Christianity. In the past decade, there has been a revival of interest in Stoicism as a viable philosophy for today. If you search the internet, you'll find lots of websites and blogs and podcasts and conferences and so on modern Stoicism. The Stoic writings from ancient times that we still have today come from three main authors who lived in Rome and Greece during the first 2 centuries AD. The first of these was Seneca, who was a businessman, a playwright, and an advisor to a Roman emperor. And we still have more than 100 essays and letters that he wrote, filled with Stoic wisdom. The second was Epictetus, a former slave who was freed, became a philosopher, and founded a school of Stoicism in Greece. And we have 2 books containing what you could call lecture notes from his classes that were recorded by one of his students. The third is Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who put Stoicism into practice in his daily life while leading the empire for 19 years during very stressful times. He kept a personal journal that is now called the Meditations that has been an inspiration to many through the centuries. So what is Stoicism all about? The goal of Stoicism is happiness. How can we live a truly happy life? The Greek word for happiness was eudaimonia. Today, when we talk about happiness, we think of a kind of superficial, cheerful, emotional state of mind that changes with circumstances. If things are going well, you're happy. But if things are going badly, you're not happy. But eudaimonia is more of a deep-seated, enduring sense of well-being. The Stoics understood this in terms of the life worth living, a deep sense of satisfaction that comes from living well, that doesn't depend so much on external circumstances. The Stoics also emphasized the value of tranquility, a sense of inner peace or equanimity that involves freedom from overwhelming negative emotions such as fear, anxiety, anger, depression, and the presence of positive emotions like joy and love. For the Stoics, this inner sense of well-being, peace of mind, is the most important thing we can seek in life. So where does this inner happiness and tranquility, well-being come from? Well, first, it does not come from what the Stoics called externals. To find that inner peace, we should not look to things like wealth, power, fame, other people, pleasure, good health. And these are the kinds of things that most of us think will bring us happiness. This is what we spend all our time and energy working for. Lots of money, a good job, a happy marriage, a beautiful house, a car, good health, enjoyable vacations, lots of friends, popularity. But the Stoics say that these things are not a reliable basis for happiness because we don't have complete control over these things. They can be lost or taken away from us, so they can't guarantee our happiness. Also, if we base our happiness on these things, we'll never be truly satisfied. We'll always be wanting more. No matter how beautiful your house is, you always want a better one. The Stoics call these sorts of things indifferent. They don't make any difference to our happiness one way or the other. Now, it's important to recognize that this does not mean that we shouldn't care at all about these things or try to achieve them in our lives. There's nothing wrong with seeking to have these sorts of things, just like everyone else. The Stoics prefer to have money than to be poor. They prefer to be healthy rather than sick. They prefer to be liked by others than to be disliked. But we shouldn't let these things become the basis of our happiness. We always need to remind ourselves that they are of secondary importance and we can be happy without them. So these things are what the Stoics referred to as preferred indifference. We prefer them, but they're indifferent to our true happiness. So when we think about this pandemic that we are living through today, this is what the Stoics would call externals. They'd call it a dispreferred indifferent. It has disrupted our daily lives, our ability to go shopping, to get together with friends, to go on vacations, possibly our job, our income, our investments, our physical health. But these are all externals, which are indifferent and not essential to our inner happiness. So what does bring this happiness and tranquility? For the Stoics, the life worth living is the life of virtue. The Greek word for virtue is arete, which means excellence, excellence of character. It has to do with being an excellent human being, seeking to be the best person you can be. For the Stoics, the most important characteristics of humans are that first, we are capable of reason, And second, we are social beings. So living an excellent or virtuous life means living rationally rather than being driven by emotions and irrational thinking, and living for the benefit of all, caring for others as well as ourselves. Virtue or excellence of character is so important to the Stoics because it is the only thing in our lives that we have complete control over. An important saying in Stoicism is that the only truly good thing is virtue, and the only truly bad thing is vice. Everything else is indifferent to our happiness or well-being. Many people would say that this pandemic is a bad thing. Look at all the ways it has adversely affected our lives. It has killed people. It's destroyed the economy. But Stoicism would say the pandemic is neither good nor bad. It's indifferent. What's good or bad is the way we respond to the pandemic, whether we allow it to make us anxious, angry, to lash out at others, to blame others, or whether we take this as an opportunity to practice virtue, to be kind to others, for example. The dichotomy of control is a central concept of Stoicism that is particularly relevant in this pandemic. Epictetus said, "Some things are up to us or in our control, and some things are not up to us." This seems like an obvious truism, but it has profound implications. So he's saying to find tranquility of mind, we need to distinguish between the things we have control over and those we don't. And we need to focus on the things we can control and not worry about the things we can't control. So this is how a Stoic would approach daily life in this pandemic, constantly keeping in mind, what do I have control over in this situation and what don't I have control over? And this helps to make things simpler for us. It's easy to get overwhelmed and upset by everything that's going on out there. The more we watch the news, the more confused and overwhelmed and anxious and angry we get. But if we can distinguish between what we can and can't control, things are simplified. The things we can't control completely are the externals that I already mentioned. Your possessions, what people think about you, what other people do, your health, even when you're going to die. We have partial control over these things, but not complete control. So in this pandemic, I can't control the virus. I can't control the fact that people are dying. I can't control whether I catch the virus. I can't control the need for social distancing and shutting down of businesses and stores and so on. I can't control Donald Trump and other people and what they do in response to the pandemic or how they handle it. All of this is the reality that the universe is presenting us with at this time, and we can't change that. But what we do have control over is our own response to the pandemic. And this is what we need to focus on. So first, we can control our own actions. We can modify our behavior to try to make ourselves and our loved ones as safe as possible, practicing social distancing and wearing masks, for example. And perhaps even more importantly, we can control our own thoughts and mental reactions to the pandemic, how we evaluate this situation that we face. And this brings us to the Stoic view of negative emotions, or what they call passions. Epictetus, again, said, "It is not events themselves that disturb people, but their judgments concerning those events." So he's saying that our emotions are determined by our thoughts. This is one of the basic psychological principles of Stoicism. And it's also a central idea of modern cognitive behavior therapy, the leading evidence-based form of psychotherapy. And in fact, these ideas in cognitive behavior therapy came directly from Stoicism. So in this pandemic, people assume that their emotional reactions, anxiety, depression, anger, and so on, are inevitable. They'll say, this pandemic is making me anxious. It's making me worried or depressed or angry. So there's a sense that those emotions are directly caused by the pandemic, the situation that we're faced with. And there's a sense that we don't have any control over that. But Stoicism says no, it's not the pandemic that makes you emotionally distressed. It's the way you think about it. For example, if you focus on thinking how terrible it would be, how awful to become infected by the virus, that leads to emotions of anxiety and worry and even panic. Or if you focus on thoughts about how other people are acting badly, how political leaders are botching things, this leads to emotions of anger, irritability, lashing out at others. Or if you focus your thinking on how much this pandemic has made life difficult for you, how it has disrupted your life and so on, that can lead to emotions of despondency and depression. So instead, Stoicism encourages us to shift our way of thinking about the pandemic. Yes, it is a setback. It throws a huge monkey wrench into our hopes and plans for the next while. It's not what we would have hoped for, but we can view it as a challenge, an opportunity to put Stoicism into practice. We can think about how we can live virtuously in these circumstances and how this could make us a better person. And that completely changes the way we feel about it. Instead of feeling anxious, depressed, and angry, it can make us feel energized, motivated, more caring towards other people. So this is really a profound insight of Stoicism that has been supported by modern psychological research, by cognitive science. We can control our own emotions, not by repressing them once they've already started, which is not healthy, but by changing the thinking that causes them in the first place. Marcus Aurelius said, something can ruin your life only if it ruins your character. Otherwise, it cannot harm you. So as you can see, putting Stoicism into practice requires us to radically change the way most people normally think about things and the value that we place on things in our lives. So this takes a lot of practice. And the Stoics developed many mental exercises for making these new ways of thinking habitual, to prepare themselves for challenging situations like this pandemic and to avoid slipping back into old ways of thinking. So premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of adversity, is one of these Stoic mental exercises that they developed. And this involves regularly meditating on the impermanence of things in your life, taking the time to remind yourself that you could lose various things in your life, your possessions, your money, your friends and family, your health, your own life, in order to prepare yourself mentally for future losses. Part of this involves reminding yourself of your own mortality, not in an anxious or fearful way, but in a calm, contemplative way. Death is inevitable sooner or later for all of us, and we need to prepare ourselves to accept death with equanimity whenever it comes. Most people avoid thinking about their own death. They see it as something to be anxious or fearful about. But for the Stoics, facing the reality of your own mortality can be very empowering and liberating. So during this pandemic, this exercise would involve taking time to contemplate what it would be like to be diagnosed with COVID-19 and to really vividly imagine yourself in that situation, getting progressively sicker, having to go to the hospital, going into intensive care, knowing that you're likely to die, and to think about how you would respond to this mentally, and to prepare yourself to face it without distress or anxiety. So this exercise helps us to put death into proper perspective and to recognize that it's not something to be afraid of. Another benefit of this little exercise is that it completely changes our perspective on the lives we now live. When you finish this meditation and realize, I'm still alive, I'm not dying yet, it makes you much more appreciative of the things that you have now, the relationships, the life you live. It gives us greater joy at being alive now, a renewed desire to live fully and to make the most of this life while we can. Marcus Aurelius said, "Do not fear ceasing to live, but fear never having begun to live properly." Another exercise is the view from above, and this is one that helps to get a broader perspective on a stressful situation that we're going through. And it involves imagining yourself looking down on yourself in your current situation from high above. Think about all the millions of people in the world around you that have all kinds of problems, many of them much worse than you have. And also take the perspective of time. Think of all the people throughout history who have gone through much worse circumstances. Think of the plagues that decimated the population of the world in the past. One of these, in fact, happened during the time Marcus Aurelius was emperor, and it killed nearly a third of the population over a number of years. And in fact, it was the cause of Marcus Aurelius's own death in the end. So this coronavirus pandemic that we're going through is nothing compared to that. So this exercise helps to put our problems into realistic perspective. It helps us to be less likely to catastrophize and become overly upset about them. And it helps us to be grateful about the good things we still have, even in this time of pandemic. So in conclusion, this is just a brief introduction to Stoicism, and I hope it gives you some sense of how Stoicism as a philosophy of life can be helpful during times like this pandemic. And as I said, this pandemic is a reminder for all of us of the uncertainties of life. It reminds us that we are mortal beings, always at the mercy of forces outside our control. Our lives can be thrown into disarray at any time. And Stoicism essentially shows us that things like the pandemic can upset us only if we let them. Happiness and inner tranquility are within our control, even during times like these. Personally, I find this philosophy to be very empowering. It emphasizes individual agency. Each one of us has what we need within ourselves to live fully and meaningfully. And it helps us to find that strength within ourselves for dealing with life. And also, I like the emphasis on reason and rationality, being fully in touch with reality, facing the real challenges of life with courage, rather than trying to cope by using denial and avoidance or wishful thinking. You don't have to believe in supernatural entities or powers or life after death and so on. Again, I'm not saying that everyone should become a Stoic. For me, this way of thinking resonates, and I found it to be extremely helpful for finding peace of mind during times like this. And some of you may find it appealing as well. But I know that others may be drawn to different ways of making sense of life and finding an overarching framework to live by. I think the important thing for each of us is to find the path that works best for us. Thank you.